Story time! I've been on the job search recently. It's been hell. I barely ever get any responses to my applications, and when I do, it's pretty much always a rejection email. And I've been getting the impression this is a lot of people's experience with looking for remote jobs. But that's not what I want to talk about specifically today, because remote jobs are much more subject to possible scams. Since people can hide behind any number of layers of accounts and usernames, it puts them at much less risk and creates fewer details they need to hide. I had an experience with this rather recently. Luckily, the only thing I lost was time, and I thought to myself, man, these people are awful. I wish I could inconvenience them more than just using up their time. And then it occurred to me, I'm a YouTuber. I have a platform. So today I'm sharing the story, first of all, because I find it kind of funny. Second, because I want to warn you all of what are some of the things to watch out for. Third, to teach people what the actual dangers are and what they want to get from you. We'll only actually get to describing this near the end, but we'll get to it. Please be patient. And fourth, because I want to be able to send this video to the people who tried to scam me and make them squirm a little bit. Is that petty? Maybe, but like, they're scammers, come on. If they had their way, they would have all my money, and they don't care what that means for me. So you know what? I think being a little petty is perfectly fair. Also, know that this is pretty specifically for remote jobs. I don't know anything about in-person job scams, so I'm not sure how much of this is transferable, but I imagine some of it is. This also goes for, say, maybe someone is trying to take control of your Discord account. I recently had someone try a Discord scam on me. I'll bring that up in a couple places too. I know this is not my normal gaming video, but I thought it was interesting and kind of funny enough to share, and hopefully it helps someone. I do want to be able to point and laugh at how stupid these people are and go ha 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 ha, but I can only imagine they still do it because it works on some people, and I do want to try to help. So how it all began, I got sent an email through the contact page on my portfolio website that I've been using to show off my video work to potential recruiters. This message allegedly came from Webstaurant Store. Now, the business itself is real. It's a supplier that sells various utensils, equipment, and general supplies to restaurants. This email is not actually from the company, it's from an impersonator, an imposter, if you will, but I didn't realize that at the time. Now, this name here that they chose as the representative of their company, I highly doubt that this is their real name, but it does seem like this is the name of a real person, so that's why I'm blurring out the last name. I'm just gonna call them Jessica. The email itself is mostly a copy of a job listing. I just copied it into Microsoft Word to fit it into 2 screenshots nicely, and the job itself looks very promising. The skills required, exactly what I'm good at. Pay is really good, it comes with a lot of benefits, almost too good to be true. However, you may have noticed some strangeness with this listing. The very first one I noticed was at the end here, when they asked me to get into contact with them over Zoom. That is alarm number 1. Scammers will try to get you to move to an instant messaging platform like Zoom or Skype as soon as possible because these applications don't have any moderation staff. They don't have anybody you can report the scam to. A real employer will have no problem communicating over a job recruiting site like Indeed or simply over email. And after you're hired, perhaps moving over to a business-oriented messaging system like Asana, Slack, or even just Discord for the sake of convenience. There's a couple others though that I didn't notice at the time. First, most businesses will not have an @gmail.com address. They will have blank at Sam and Colby or blank at Dominion Universe or whatever. Like the domain name, the part after the @ symbol will be their business or website. This is not always true. My previous boss had an @gmail.com for his business's email, but he also had like a very small company, like 5 people total, and the only person using the domain name would have been him, so there's no point in getting a company domain name if there's only one person using it. But if you are supposedly being hired for a big business and they have @gmail.com, that flag is red as hell. Also, I didn't notice at the time, but you might see the email address is Webstaurant Store 51. Why add 51 to it? This is not as strong of a red flag as the others. Like, I guess any given business could just have a numbered email address and it's that simple. But this implies that they've gone down previous numbered email addresses and they're just going down the list and will eventually go to 52, 53, and so on. Another thing I want to call attention to is this YouTube video it has linked. It leads to an unlisted video on the actual Webstaurant Store YouTube page to the actual demo reel for their actual video department. This initially had me convinced this was a real job listing, but since it's unlisted, all you need to do in order to share it is have the link. That doesn't mean they are the business. What I suspect happened is that the link got shared because of a real Webstaurant store job opening, and a scammer managed to nab it, bookmark it, whatever, and use it to pretend to be Webstaurant store. And now that it's sent to me, I have the link. That doesn't make me a Webstaurant store either, does it? Again, this is not necessarily like a point against them, like them having a YouTube link in the job listing is not a problem. But this is something they will use to give themselves authority. And you should be aware that anybody can give you an unlisted YouTube video. That doesn't mean they own the video. In general, scammers will try to give themselves authority. Like with that Discord scam I mentioned earlier, they hacked into one of my friend's accounts first, who then said to me and a bunch of other people, hey, I reported you an accident, I'm trying to get it undone, but you need to get in contact with this other person, who then redirected me to someone impersonating a Discord moderator. And he had like this whole page that's like, this is my Discord moderator license, even though like that doesn't actually prove anything. Like anyone can make this in Photoshop. I could make this in Photoshop. They tried to convince me that any second now my account would get permanently and irreversibly closed, and he even said everything will be back to normal as long as you're cooperating with me here. Like, bro thinks he's Jigsaw. This is like, he sounds like a corrupt cop from The Godfather or something. I remember that sentence absolutely making me like, alright, this is not a member of Discord support. But they said it to try to put that fear in me, to paint themselves as like the savior I deserve or something. Luckily, I was skeptical and found through my searching that real Discord moderators will not try to message you on the Discord app for support and information. It'll be over email instead. And that was a crisis averted. So you should be willing to question that authority that they present. Don't just take them at their word. Look into things yourself. That's a pretty good general rule for like this whole situation, basically. There's one final flaw with this listing that you may have already noticed if you have particularly sharp eyes. See if you can find it. I didn't notice it until near the end of this whole endeavor when I decided to put the job listing in a Word document so I didn't have to go back to my email every time to look at it. Because, and let me show you now, a few red lines showed up when I did this and drew my eyes to this part. They call themselves Wildlight Entertainment. Wildlight Entertainment is a gaming company, which is completely different. This is a wildly different organization altogether. They definitely just copy-pasted a diversity statement from a different listing and didn't change the name. And if you look at Wildlight's career listings page, they have a notice that says, hey, we've had some people trying to impersonate our company. If in doubt, look at the domain name. So these are probably the same people that are impersonating Wildlight. It's just a different operation they have going on. But of course, I didn't notice this at the time. This is a surprise tool that will help us later. Huh? Sorry, that was awful. It'll come back up, don't worry. So by this point, my attention was already raised, but I decided, screw it, as long as I don't sign any contracts or give any sensitive information, I'll be fine. If it's real, I could get a job from it. If it's fake, just don't give them my IP address or anything like that. So I sent a contact request on Zoom to the email they listed, got a response from Jessica. They even used the same title as they did in the job listing they sent, of Online Recruitment Manager. It seemed promising. I remember having this moment of like, oh, awesome. Little did I know how ridiculous this would soon get. So then I respond, basically saying, hey, I'd love to arrange a specific meeting time if you want to have an interview, you know. I have things to do, but I'm very flexible on when I do them exactly, so I can plan around when you need me. Please let me know what time would work best for you. Now, what a real business would do in this situation, even if they don't have that much of a time preference, they'll just pick a time, or at least a ballpark range, like Thursday afternoon or something, for you to meet with each other and get things arranged and ask questions and stuff. Here, this person says, I'm available to discuss the open position at your convenience. Text me anytime that suits you. Woo, woo. This is a bullshit alert. A business that is hiring people, even if they've already seen your work and are interested in you, will have questions they want answers to. And because hiring generally takes a long time, they will want them answered ASAP. Whether that be about your creative process or your leadership style, or even when you have lunch. And they will either ask you to fill out a standard application form, or if they're already interested, they will take the lead on scheduling an interview. So I ask them if I can organize my thoughts, get back to them later. And they respond with only okay, with no punctuation, a wildly different style of talking than just a moment ago. And technically not even grammatically correct. Now this might seem like a very small nitpick, and it kind of is, but you should keep an eye out for little things like this because it can add up. If things are already seeming off, this is just further imbalancing the weirdness of the situation, as you'll be able to see in a moment. If there are a lot of errors like this, it might be a bad sign. So I end up using a bit of my time in the next couple days to come up with some very detailed questions asking about expected production time and the scale of each video, what kind of hardware we'll need for it, and what exactly the application process will be. I also bring up that I looked on the Webstaurant store careers page and couldn't find a listing anywhere for a video editor position. Because that's true. I went and looked, and I couldn't find a video editor job listing. And that's another piece of advice I'd like to bring to you. Look up the company, see if you can find any official place of contact or official listings, and see if there are any discrepancies, because that could be another alarm. Like, again, on the Wildlight page, they straight up say, our domain name will never be @gmail.com. 2 days after the initial exchange, I'm getting ready to send my questions over, and that's when I notice the thing I mentioned earlier when they called themselves Wildlight Entertainment in the listing, and I'm like, oh, huh. And at this point, I'm like 97% sure it's a scam, but I decide to hold off on mentioning that for the time being. I want to investigate just a little more, if only for the hell of it, you know? I send those questions over and the response with, thanks for reaching out about this opportunity. The response I get, you are welcome. No punctuation. I then get a second message from them a few minutes later that actually goes for my questions. And again, it's in a completely different format, which is just weird. Again, the weirdness just kind of stacks on top of itself continuously. Now, these answers they give are very specifically formatted, don't you think? To the point where it seems almost fabricated. Or perhaps robotic. There's no way to know for certain, but I suspect the reason these two responses are formatted so differently, and again, separated by a few minutes, is because there's a big likelihood this second one was mostly or entirely generated by an AI chatbot like ChatGPT or something similar. And if a person is feeding you answers from a chatbot, that means they don't know what they're doing. And if they don't know what they're doing, then this probably isn't a real job. And even if it is a real job, you probably shouldn't work for them anyways, because they're feeding you bullshit. As for the answers themselves, let's go through them. The first one here isn't very detailed. Ideally, it'd like go through the process more, or at least direct me to someone who can tell me more like I asked. But other than that, there isn't anything obviously wrong with this answer. Second, these system requirements here are much higher than any video editing job I've taken. Like 192 gigabytes of RAM? The only things that require that much RAM are like extremely high level engineers and like entire server databases. One person rendering some video, even if it's at 4K resolution, does not need that much memory. Or like a 24 core CPU. I get by with 4 cores just fine. There's also just some general inconsistencies and weirdness. Like the laptop section also says 512 gigabyte SSD, and then 2 bullet points down it says SSD storage, again without a number. Like that's just not sloppy in a way that a normal person would do. Like I imagine what would happen in a real situation is that the head of the video department or something like that will write down the very specific specs they want and hand it to the recruiting manager and go, here, these are the specs we need if anybody asks. If the recruiting manager is going to mess that up, they're probably going to put down like 512 gigabyte SSD and then put that down again. They're not going to put 512 gigabyte SSD in one place and then SSD storage in another. That's the type of mistake that kind of only an AI will do. Or like the parts they go into detail with between the primary machine and the laptop are different. Like they only mention RAM for one, even though like if you care about the RAM for one, you should care about the RAM for the other, you know? And little slip-ups like this can be revealing that either A, seriously nobody proofread or edited this, or B, it was done by an AI. And being able to determine which is which mostly comes from experience. If you've seen a lot of AI writing, you just kind of get a sense for this sort of thing. But whichever one it is, not a good sign. Now for this last question, they finally say they'd like to schedule an interview. Hold on. Hold the phone. A text interview? A text interview. What is this, a low-budget Disney sitcom? People don't do text interviews. Even people who are casual during business want to do video call interviews to ensure they get a good read on the person they're talking to. My previous boss was super casual. We were so casual, we'd freely joke around and like drop swears in our messages to each other. He was fun to talk to, actually. But even he wanted to do a video call when we first met, and he'd want to do them again every now and then, whether it be to touch base, teach me something about how the process is changing, whatever. If someone wants to do a text interview, No way in hell that's real. I have never seen a real job recruiter that wanted to do a text interview. And as if all of that was perfectly normal, they end the message by addressing what I mentioned earlier with the missing listing on Webstaurant Store careers page by saying, and I quote, "The Webstaurant Store careers website listings are periodically updated, so don't worry about the missing listing." They straight up just said, don't worry about it, and thought that was an acceptable answer. Again, one or two of these things happening could be chalked up to a simple mistake. One that should make you wary, but a mistake nonetheless. All of these things combined is frankly ridiculous. No way this is a real job. Also, they said not to worry about it, but I'm allegedly talking to the online recruitment manager, the person in charge of recruiting remote people. Isn't this your job? Aren't you the person who's supposed to update that? Similarly, to bring up the people who try to get my Discord account again, they eventually got to this part of the message that's like, Discord might warn you this is a scam, that's normal, don't worry about it. And they make that part really short because they don't want you to think about it for very long. They do this because they don't have control over everything. They can't control the warning Discord gives you. They can't control if I notice there's a discrepancy with the job listings. All they can do is say, don't worry about it, and do their best to direct your attention elsewhere. Don't fall for it. Ask questions until you are satisfied. And if it's a scam, you probably won't get satisfied. So by this point in the process, I'm just about positive this is fake, but just for the sake of getting a second opinion and make sure I'm not crazy, I messaged my best friend in the whole world, Al. Al has a lot of experience with the job search, both as the employee searching and being in a group of people that decides who to hire. So I trust his judgment on this more than probably anybody else in the world. I explained some of the oddities to him, and his opinion was to, and I quote, "explode them with hammers." And then our further discussion on actual further action we can take led me to getting the idea for this video. So everyone say thank you, Al. But yes, don't be afraid to get a second opinion on suspicious job listings. Because if something seems wrong, they'll probably see it too and go, yeah, that's sus. But I remained cordial with this supposed recruiter still for just a bit longer. The first thing I bring up is scheduling a definitive time for the interview, and I stress that I want a concrete date and time for it that they decide and not me. It is then after that when I finally decide to bring up the wildlife entertainment thing and ask if they have a reasonable explanation, and I tried to seem as amicable about it as possible just to see what they come up with. They decide. The story they're gonna go with is that Webstaurant has recently acquired Wildlight's assets and had accidentally kept some of the wording on their stuff. So you mean to tell me that Webstaurant Store, a business that sells appliances, shelving units, utensils, and other random garbage to restaurants, recently acquired a video game company that formed not even 2 full years ago? And that's why you put the wrong company name on your job listing that you probably had in your files long before that ever happened. Localized entirely in your kitchen. Yes. May I see it? No. Like, do they think I'm a moron? I think they expect me to not think at all about what job I'm looking into getting for the next who knows how long. Like, they think I'm gonna put less thought into this than, like, the shirt I put on that day. And then, as if that weren't enough, the next message is, let me know when you're ready for the interview. We can do it whenever you need to. Bro, I just said I want you to decide the time. You do it! What is wrong with you? And then they send me a PDF to fill the questions out on. The questions themselves are nothing unusual, but as said before, it's the format of a text interview that raises alarms. If there are any questions that they have every single employee fill out, which all companies should, they should have had you do that on a standard application before you get invited to an interview at all. This is not an interview. They just call it an interview so you don't get suspicious. This is just a fancy application. Now, I have not messaged them back since then. I intend for the next message I send them to be this video. But there is one other job scam that I've gone a little bit further with before realizing what it was. Don't worry, I didn't give them anything. I unfortunately don't have screenshots of what happened because it was like a few years ago and I couldn't find it again. But let me at least describe how it played out. They gave me a PDF with questions on it, same as this one did. They even gave me a time limit. They said I had to have it in by like 30 minutes later or whatever it was. I assume to invoke panic in the person they're trying to scam, rushing them and keeping them from thinking properly. The Discord scam did a similar thing there actually, where they tried to convince me that any minute now my account could get closed and I had to switch the address to be under a different email, which might I add was a Hotmail email address. Did they want me to think that Discord still uses Hotmail in the year of our Lord 2024? And how would changing the email even help me with this? But anyways, back to that old job scam. After I completed the PDF of questions, which again had nothing particularly suspicious on it, they said, all right, we'll review this real quick. And like half an hour later, they were like, great, you're hired, which is insanely fast. No company decides who to hire that fast. Even if you know exactly who you want to hire, they still look at other candidates within this window of time they have to hire someone and see if maybe there's someone miraculously they find who is better. Now, you may have been wondering throughout this whole thing, okay, but how is this a scam exactly? How do they get anything from you? Well, let me provide you with an answer. This one told me, okay, so we need to send you computer equipment for the job. We're going to have you buy the equipment and have it sent to us. Then we'll send it to you and pay you back for it. That's what they say will happen. But the central part of the scam is that after you buy the stuff for them, nothing is stopping them from just not talking to you ever again and just leaving with the stuff you bought for them. This is the central part of the job scam, how they actually make the money off you. And I assume the scam from the fake restaurant store listing had the computer specs that high for that reason. They wanted me to spend a lot of money on very expensive computer equipment and then just give it to them and just buy it for them, basically. In this older scam I got, it was at this point they tried to get me to sign a contract. And again, they stressed how fast this needed to get done for things to work out. But in reality, any reasonable company will give you time to review a contract with a legal advisor before signing anything. Not even necessarily a lawyer or someone with a law degree, though that is preferable, to be clear. It could just be like a family member or something that looks over it, just to get another person, you know? Like I said earlier, getting a second opinion from someone you trust is very important. Most hiring companies will not rush you like this. Hiring takes a long time because that's what it takes to do it right. If they are rushing you, the best case scenario is that they're also rushing themselves, which is a bad sign. Now, obviously, I didn't sign anything. That would be a terrible idea. I tried to see if I had the contract PDF still like in my files somewhere. I couldn't find it anywhere. So unfortunately, I can't use it as an example. And I suspect the fake restaurant store job would have led to exactly this too, where they wanted me to sign a contract, but I didn't want to waste any more of my time with this, frankly. So that, everyone, is that. In conclusion, just do your research. Check into the company, make sure everything lines up. If you notice one thing odd, keep an eye on it, maybe ask a question about it later. If you aren't satisfied by the answer, you can be the judge of when exactly you should push further on it, but don't forget about it. And if you have any doubts on how legit this job is, get a second opinion on it. Someone you trust. Don't sign any contracts, don't give them your bank information or social security. In general, if you're uncomfortable with it, don't do it. Our instincts as humans are normally quite good. And if it feels off, it probably is off. The big tells you can watch out for: the domain name of the email, typically a big one. Asking you to talk on an instant messaging program instead of email or a job recruiting website are both huge red flags. If they want to do a text interview, that is pretty sus, as the kids say. If there are any weird discrepancies in the messages or the job postings, whether that just be in like the style of how they talk or the facts getting mixed up, they could be innocent errors or they could be signs that they're putting on an act. If they're trying to rush you, that's a red flag, but if they're being too vague or non-specific with the scheduling, that can also be a red flag. Now, despite me having said all that, it's hard for these to be completely solid rules that are always true about this sort of thing, because everyone does things differently and the world is always changing. Maybe like you notice one of these things, but it's actually a real job listing. Who knows? The best thing you can probably do, frankly, is just trust your instincts, and that's probably the best one-sentence summary I can give of this, is trust your instincts, because if something seems weird, it probably is weird.